What's up, nerds? My name is Jeremy Akers, Jeremy Nathaniel Akers, and I'm a busy little bee. I want to talk to you about one of my favorite liberating structures, the user experience fishbowl. Now, the user experience fishbowl is one of those structures I put in this interaction pattern type bucket. And I'm going to show how what becomes possible when you start to think about how liberating structures are especially modular and multi-scale with the user experience fishbowl. So let's get into it. The user experience fishbowl is a great pattern for this spreading of info. If you're familiar with the sort of 5 Stone Age tools of human to human communication and the way in which they tend to do one to many, the UX fishbowl is going to help interrupt that pattern of giving us many to many communication, which is great because we really want to avoid, especially dynamics like this huge anti-pattern in group communication, which is often seen around presentations where somebody will go through their slide deck and then they will ask any questions. And of course, after being, sort of put into a coma by being spoken at rather than communicated with, crickets will ensue. And after, because people are also terrifically insecure, you know, people can tolerate like 30 seconds of, quote unquote, awkward silence after having asked that any questions. And when no one responds, the person who presented the information will just assume, nope, there's no questions. Well, that was my song and dance. That's it. So the UX fishbowl is going to help us spread information and upregulate signal by offering folks a more genuine interaction. So how are we going to do that? Well, first and foremost, just like we do with these interaction patterns, we're going to emphasize how groups are formed, how time is managed, and the set of steps that is associated with those groups in that form, and how participation is then distributed. So what we're going to do is we're going to form an inner group usually of like 3 to 5 people, right? Ordinarily, if you've ever seen a panel discussion, these people go on a podium. They go to the front of the room and everybody sits in their sort of like stadium or their theater style seating, looking at this panel of people sort of aligned in a row, maybe in chairs, maybe at a table, something like that. What we want to do in contrast to that is we want to put these guys in an inner circle, and we actually want to invite everybody else to arrange themselves in a circle around that inner circle, right? So we're going to make concentric circles, a core circle of the people that are going to participate in our fishbowl, and everyone else sort of like pressed up shoulder to shoulder around that group of participants. And then we want to have, basically an organic or unscripted conversation. Again, with these interaction patterns, there's not a whole lot of information about what you want to put at the center of that conversation, but most anything is good if you can give people this organic and unscripted conversation. I think it's described on the website that imagine the vibe that you might be able to stimulate is like if Warren Buffett and George Soros are in a cab and you got to be a fly on the wall. Whether you vibe with those nerds or not, the point is, imagine if you got to listen to people that are great in their field, that are experts, that are leaders, that are insightful, have a conversation with one another. How valuable would that be for the NPCs, the random character, the background characters of our lives? Pardon me. So when we think about time boxes, rather than saying this is how long it should be, because everybody knows that's a design choice. Sometimes you want a shorter time box, sometimes you want a longer time box. I'm going to advocate for a time box of less than 20 minutes. Yeah, less than 20 minutes. Is that actually the less than? I hope that's the less than symbol. Why less than 20 minutes? After about 20 minutes, people are going to check out. Like you're just going to lose folks. Concentration and conscious, effortful attention is both a skill and kind of like a muscle, meaning that it takes practice, and it can also be depleted. Right, you can be exhausted after having used it, and when it's up, it's up. So 20 minutes is about the amount of time that grown adults can pay attention. And so use less than 20 minutes as your time boundary for this unscripted conversation. After that 20 minutes, though, we want to encourage folks to form up into small groups that vary in size from 3 to 6 people. You could also go for pairs in this situation, whatever's clever. But invite folks to form up into small groups and think about like a tiniest little debrief. Inviting folks to vibe and share information about what stood out from the interaction that they just witnessed. And I really like this question, which is, what was the least clear about that conversation? What was the portion? Let's just assume that there was something that wasn't clear, and let's highlight whatever that piece of information was. So rather than any questions, what was the least clear? By doing this in small groups, of course, we get a lot of interaction. We get a lot of cross-pollination about what's salient for folks. And around this question of what was the least clear, we get the opportunity for people to self-soothe, to get answers to their questions in a smaller group of peers, rather than asking the big boss about the portion that was the least clear. As we do that, the fish sort of at the center of our fishbowl, they can continue their conversation, right? And we want to invite people in these small groups to write down questions, especially on index cards. Index cards are infinitely superior than Post-it notes. So write down your questions on some index cards. And again, around time boxing, people have been sitting there, listening quietly for some time. So I think like half the amount of time you want them to listen, give them the opportunity to communicate with some other folks about what they heard. So 10 minutes, 20 minutes feels good for me. But of course, it's your design choice. There's something to be said for longer time boundaries. There's also something to be said for shorter time boundaries. Figure it out and make your own goddamn choices. After we do that debrief thing, we want to feed the fish the questions, especially the questions. There's an anti-pattern around this any questions that comes up here, even in the UX Fishbowl, which is, I want to sound smart, and or I have something that I would like to say in response to that, a comment that I would like to veil in a question. Sometimes that veil is thinner than others, but especially here, we really want to upregulate questions and think about feeding those questions to the fish so that we can sort of prompt them to get some more interaction and more information. Remember, our goal is to upregulate the signal, whether these are people in a position of authority, because hierarchies and centralization still exist, or whether these are people that have expert knowledge. We're trying to upregulate their signal to the rest of the group. So, again, less than 20 minutes is a good amount of time to feed the fish those questions. You'll notice there's another anti-pattern around timeliness. Like you might get, if you don't manage time, you may get exactly one question into this fishbowl and they vibe on that. leaving everybody else's questions sort of like not asked. So you'll have to think about, do I ask that question to just one person? Do I say, hey, we've got 20 minutes. How many questions can we get through? Like some form of active time management is going to be your friend here. So I would say also collaborative documentation is very good for this type of experience. You can think about the role of a scribe. You can also think about how this structure pairs with simple ethnography. And this strings, of course, really well with what, so what, now what. After you've seen all of this interaction, you vibed with some folks and asked some questions. All right, do a big fucking debrief. What did you see, hear, and notice from these interactions? What are the implications of that information? And now, what in God's name do you want to do about this new signal, this new information that you've received? How do you integrate it into your life? So that is the user experience fishbowl. Now I'm going to go ahead and unpack the ways in which we can use such a structure in this multi-scale and modular way, how we can snap it together with some of these other structures. Especially since it is one of these more vanilla interaction patterns. We can both fill it with another interaction pattern inside there, as well as give it a little bit more spice and flavor by using different structures inside the context of the user experience fishbowl. Before I go on, you may be thinking, hey, that's not the user experience fishbowl I know. When I think about user experience fishbowls, or when I think about fishbowls, I think about this like musical chair thing where we have an empty stool. Everybody knows that shit. I don't like it. So if that's what you're looking for, go somewhere else. I don't think that's the vibe because it comes too close to just slightly organizing an unstructured group discussion, and I don't have time for that shit. So that's my tiny rant on empty chair fishbowls and why they can go fuck themselves. At any rate, getting back to interaction patterns and how to use them in a modular way, we're going to use a user experience conversation cafe. And the basic blueprint there is we do the whole same song and dance with arranging concentric circles, giving folks some time to debrief and vibe, and feeding the fish with additional questions. But what we do here in this central circle initially is we use the structure of a conversation cafe in the user experience fishbowl. So rather than just saying, here's a prompt, ready, set, go, what we're going to do is we're going to organize this conversation a little bit more than normal by using the structure of a conversation cafe. And conversation cafe is going to work, if you don't recall, we're going to offer these nerds some form of question, prompt, or situation challenge. We're going to offer an invitation. Then we're going to invite them to go around the circle once, responding to that invitation. We're going to invite them to go around the circle a second time, responding to each other's shares. Then we're going to invite them to have a bit of an unstructured group discussion about the topic. And then we're going to invite them after that to go around the circle one final time and share some form of takeaway. So using a conversation cafe just helps organize and structure the vibe so that we get a higher probability of this something real, of a more genuine and organic interaction because of the structure of the conversation cafe. So that may take you a little bit more time compared to just having a random prompt. But this, again, is just one of these examples of how we can use this feature of modularity in liberating structures in order to mix things up and get a little bit more spice. So since we're in the riff or variation space, let me show you one more way that we like to mix it up with the user experience fishbowl, and that is called Wise Fish, which is this sort of combination between wise crowds and the user experience fishbowl, where once more we use all the same song and dance of the UX fishbowl. But again, in this central conversation, we will host an edition of Wise Crowds inside that container. So we will have one of these folks take on the role of client, and they will ask a question. They will offer a situation or a challenge to the rest of the group. The rest of the group will then will ask clarification questions to the client, and then the client will sort of turn around and face the outside of the circle while they listen to the other consultants have a conversation about their question, situation, and challenge, and then they will turn back around and say, gee, thanks, nerds. What I really appreciated about what you guys just offered me was this bit right there, and I wonder more about that part. And after we've done that Wise Crowds thing, we can then, form small subgroups, and we can ask these subgroups, we can put them to the task of doing additional work around the recommendations perhaps that were created, or we can use some form of thinking frame in order to get alternate takes, alternate recommendations and advice from these folks. And then we can, again, feed the fish with these alternatives. So when I say some form of thinking frame, these things are a dime a dozen. I'm going to go through some of my favorites, hopefully not too exhaustively, but we could use the principles of liberating structures. We could ask every one of those subgroups to, okay, thinking from about the principle of include and unleash everyone, what do you think about the advice that the consultants were given, and what might you offer in addition or in contrast or opposed to that by maximizing that principle? So by using all the liberating structures principles, these provide frames to then think about the information that's come in from these consultants and to provide alternatives. Another set of thinking frames that I think are very useful I think these are De Bono's thinking hats, some shit like that. Thinking from the perspective of around process, creativity, looking for the benefits, looking for the factual observation through the frame of feelings, emotion, through the frame of cautious riskiness, your classic black hat, white hat bullshit. These are great thinking frames that you could explicitly invite people to here's a thinking frame. Think through this lens when you have a conversation about the recommendation that these consultants came up with. Another great thinking game is 4 Games by Jamie Combs. Sorry, Jamie, if I butcher your shit. I'm just out here doing it. You can offer the folks the thinking frame around short games. Okay, think about the physical, emotional, mental aspects of this advice and the client's context. You can offer folks to think about the mid game. What are the environs, the systems, the gadgets, the technology that we might recommend to the client? When we think about the long game, the goals, the roles, the paths, the narratives associated with that stuff. And go nuts. Go invite people into the deep game. Think about the mystery, the metaphors, and the identity, and dare I say magic when it comes to this advice. These are just 4 different frames of reference, and you can break each one down to their subsequent parts if you really want to go nuts, that help give people a basis of okay, let me think through this lens about the information that just came in there. These things are a dime a dozen, right? Spiral dynamics, the eco cycle, the first principles of regeneration, blah, 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 and enemies of adaptability, right? Team or collective flow, the forms of capital, top, middle, and bottom systems from Barry Oshry's theory of human systems, beyond budgeting, system-centered training, the theory of living human systems, group dynamics, awareness wheels, disc models, permaculture flowers, the tension between pioneer and it's scout and settler dynamics. But My point is, there's an infinite number of thinking frames that you can grab and that you can invite people into to look at this advice. Those thinking frames inevitably become the culture of your organization. So, I would say don't just grab one carelessly, but grab one that you have some sense that you want to come back to over and over and over again. That way we can make our values more than just, fucking inspirational quotes with beautiful memes in the office, but things that we can inhabit, actual living frameworks that enable us to bring to life. One of my favorite frames, since we're going to go a little apeshit on this particular idea of wise crowds inside of a UX fishbowl, I would go so far as to say, if you want to take some additional time and make this thing like the most banging version imaginable, invite those subgroups to come up with some form of test through their thinking frame. Come up with some hypothesis, some assumption that they believe about the world, and figure out a way to run an experiment that either verifies, but better yet, falsifies that assumption. And to think through about what the potential impacts that they might see in relation to that experiment, right? What might you see, hear, and notice that lets you know your assumption is either true or false? And especially around the falsification, if you're wrong, what might you expect to see? Looking for falsification is far superior than looking for validation. Because we're humans, confirmation bias is a thing. We're going to be looking for validation left, right, and center, whether it's there or not. But refutation is harder to notice. So prime your attention to look for signs that, nope, our assumption is wrong, our experiment might be bad, it might be actually making things worse, and we might want to wind it down and down-regulate it. Before we even get done with it. Shit happens all the time. That's how we make these probes safe to fail. So if you wanted to go absolutely nuts, invite everybody, like literally every person, to create some form of recommendation or test. And, since we're going absolutely nuts, put it into something like 2510 crowdsourcing. Invite everybody to grab an index card and find out where the good vibes and excitement is in the organization. And we can do this by including and unleashing everyone through the seriously playful 2510 crowdsourcing. So it's as simple as really asking folks, where is the bright future now possible? And to write down and describe that opportunity, here it is again, folks, on an index card, and every single person can write down the possibility that they're the most excited about. We then ask everyone to swap index cards at random with a few people. 5 people is enough. And importantly, don't read these cards as you're swapping them at random. Just trade them around, and so you mix them up. When somebody says stop, or you swap the 5th card, whatever works, flip it over, read it, and ask yourself, how excited does that possibility make me? And then on the back side of the card, give it a score. If you think, meh, not it, not the vibe, give it a 1. But if you go, holy hell, this is cool, I would love to be a part of that, give that thing a 5. So you can repeat that 5 times once you, so that every card basically gets 5 scores on them. So just keep repeating that cycle. When you get a card where you add the 5th score, add up all the scores, right? And then everybody in the room should be doing this at the same time if you've done this in a synchronized fashion. And so invite everybody to add them up and then to form a number line where you've got high scores on one side of the room, low scoring cards on the other side of the room. If you've got a great big group, then read aloud the top 10 scores. So the scores closest to, 25. Read those top 10 out to the room and, figure out what you may want to do with those ideas. Those are possibilities that are well supported by a random cross section of your group. I would suggest that you always collect the cards centrally in order rather than just leave them distributed in people's desks and people's wallets to go wherever they may go. So since you have a nice orderly number line, just ask folks to pass their card, to create a stack of cards so that cards stay in their correct order of their scores. But this doesn't take too much time, usually 5 minutes to get people to respond to the question. 1 minute per swap and per score means that, after 5 minutes of lining up and reading off these top scoring cards, 15 minutes later, you've got a really good temperature check of the excitement around new possibilities in the room. So coming all the way back, this becomes then more of a string of liberating structures where we can put the wise crowd structure inside the user experience fishbowl and then export that into a thinking frame and use something like 2510 crowdsourcing to really, really do the damn thing of including and unleashing everyone in a seriously playful way. So that's been a bit of a exploration of some of the ways that you can riff, adapt, and string together a user experience fishbowl. My name's Jeremy. This has been a Wise Crowds production. Thanks for your time, attention, and energy, and I'll see you guys around the way. Kisses.